welcome back. This is now time for the Sunday Mannin line. I'm Roger Watterson, and with me in the studio is the MHK for Glen, Faber and Peel, also the Minister for the Environment, Food and Agriculture, Geoffrey Boot. He's our studio guest here, and as we say so often, we are here to talk to you, so please give us a call. Catherine Nichol is now on the switch, waiting for your first telephone call, and the number to ring is 66 13 68. You can also text us on 166177 or email to studio@manxradio.com. Now, we have one or two texts and emails in, no phone calls yet. So phone calls we would like, please, 66 13 68. Now, we'll deal with whatever topics that come along shortly. You may have a totally different topic than those we've been talking about in the earlier programme, which was predominantly about the work of the Department of Environment, Food and Agriculture, or just part of the work because it's got such a wide range of duties. But you may have something else that you'd like to talk about. Who knows? We don't know. But there's all sorts of questions come in and we'll deal with them. We'll take a break in a second or two. There's one here, though, you might like to think about, Geoffrey, before we go to the break. And it's because it's nothing to do with agriculture at all. And it says, could I ask Mr. Boot, as now a senior Manx politician, whether you were offered the position of Health Minister, and if so, why you declined it? Simon would like to know.
I'll bear that in mind.
Right, go on then.
Oh, yeah, sorry, I didn't realise we started. Well, senior, does that mean I'm old or? Yes, so looking at ageism there. No, the gift of the Health Minister's position was obviously rests with the Chief Minister. I think as a fairly new minister and one that has got several challenges facing the department, it would have been disappointing to move at this stage and give up those work streams which haven't really matured. I think the Chief made a good choice with Mr. Ashford, and he's certainly making his mark, and I wish him all the best.
But were you offered it?
It's not a matter of being offered it. The Chief made his decision.
Oh, okay, right. Well, we've just one more comment and then we'll go to the break. It's got an interesting one here, which again is not to do with agriculture, but I don't think this falls into your brief, Geoffrey, but could someone please change the pedestrian light settings on Lord Street near Quine's Corner, as the green man only appears for 4 seconds and is too short for my little legs to cross the pedestrian crossing. I'm scared on getting run over by some monster machine of a car this summer. That's Mr. Verne, who is 71, he says.
Right.
So,
well, as you say, not my area of competence, as it were. DOI responsible for that. I was under the impression that most pedestrian crossings or light crossings had a standard time to allow crossing, but I can certainly mention that to Mr.
They do
Harmer.
go wrong sometimes, of course.
Yes, maybe.
So many cars go through. You've seen it change after one car sometimes, for sure. Or something.
No, I'll mention it to Mr. Harmer, the DOI Minister.
Okay, thank you. We'll take a break now. Welcome back to the Mannin line. With me in the studio is Geoffrey Boot. He's the MHK for Glen, Faber and Peel and has the interesting job of Minister for the Environment, Food and Agriculture. And that, of course, immediately raises the question, Geoffrey, this correspondent would like to know, do you benefit directly or indirectly from the Countryside Care Scheme?
The simple answer to that is no. We do have a tenant farmer who receives ADS, but I don't receive anything directly or indirectly.
Right. Well, you've got a supporter already come online. Says, Mr. Boot, you do a sterling job, sir. That's Dave.
My goodness me.
So there we are. Right. First of our calls now on the line, and it's from Peel. So it's your neck of the woods, Geoffrey. It's Fenella. Good afternoon, Fenella.
Good afternoon. I'd just like to say how much I agree with the person who put the message in about how short a time that you get to go across the zebra crossing or the panda crossing. In fact, I think you need to be Olympic runner to nearly get across some of them. It's so short. Anybody who has any kind of an infirmity, whatever, even if they're just elderly and walking slow, has got no chance.
So, well, they vary, I suppose, from place to place. I tend to use the crossing more just up at on Bucks Road, just near the Trinity Church, and there's usually plenty of time to get across the road there. Yeah. But you're saying that you're talking about the same place as our correspondent was, down on the quay?
Where you turn in to go to the car park, when you come up off the promenade,
Right.
that crossing there, that gives you very little time. And the one in Peel doesn't give you very long either. The one that's where you go across from across Albany Road.
Right.
I think, Roger, that there's obviously a balance to be had here. As a motorist, there's sometimes some frustration at the amount of time a red light's there when there's no one on the crossing, having seen people cross. But yes, I'm sure that in some places there may be timing issues, and as I said to the earlier, or replied to the earlier email, I will have a word with the DOI Minister and see what can be done, particularly in Lord Street, if it's malfunctioning.
Okay, well, Fenella, anything else you'd like to talk about before we go?
No, that's good. I just heard this thing and I thought, that is so true.
Okay, well, thank you for telling us. Okay, thanks, bye-bye.
Bye.
Right, that was Fenella. Now, planning is part of your functions, or the overall responsible for planning, if not the detailed. Well, planning, of course, is a permanent thing. It excites the emotions of people more than probably most things, and there's been quite a lot of general dissatisfaction generally with planning, hasn't there, over the years? Are you managing to get to grips with this now? Because there's new area plans coming in, which is fine, but that doesn't change the system, does it?
Well, my department's responsible for operational matters in planning, but policy is actually owned by the Cabinet Office. I think most people will be aware that there's been a planning consultation going on in conjunction with a planning review that we're working on, and the results of that will soon be made public. It's always difficult planning. Whenever a decision is made, you'll find that 50% of the people will like the decision and the others won't. So it's bound to be controversial, but planning is a key part of our infrastructure and economic development for the future. If we don't get it right, it will hamper development and hamper the economic future of the island.
Well, I think I'm very well aware that there's got a frustration of people who find that dealing with different officers in the department gets you a different result. There doesn't seem to be a combined policy. There's no, it almost left open to the interpretation of the officer.
Well, there is an element of interpretation of policy, but there are clear policy guidelines and documents that give guidance. And in fact, I look at the appeals and determine the appeals after an appeal inspector has made a recommendation to me, and it never fails to amaze me the intricacy of the policy that we have to interpret. But at the end of the day, we're all individuals, and you can construe a policy and add weight to it in one direction or another.
Well, this has come from James, who is talking about planning issues. He says the Imperial Hotel in Douglas Promenade has planning appeal notices up for demolition dated the 2nd of February, yet they've been allowed to completely close off Mona Drive to traffic. How is this possible? What restrictions are imposed to ensure our road is open quickly, and how is it possible at all when planning permission is not yet being granted? This is the Imperial owned by the Sefton Group.
Well, I'm not trying to dodge the issue here, but road closures are a DOI matter, and they would have dealt with that, and I'm sure that they have the necessary notices in place. When it comes to the planning, obviously that will go through as an operational matter to the planning department and be dealt with as a planning matter, and there will be conditions, I'm sure, attached to any permission that's granted that will restrict things that they do on site and how they manage the site as the development takes place.
Right. Now, calls coming in now, but in the meanwhile, here's another one from Lucy from Ramsey. She says, your guest gave you a spiel about planning and fishing in government labs and international conferences in his preamble for the usual Sunday show. But my question was, as a townie, how could I individually contribute to the policy and governance of the Manx Defo Department that I might like to put forward? I think she means I might like to put in my 2 cents in terms of policy and reform going forward. Or is Mr. Boot not as adaptive to an open conversation as he relates to?
I'm very adaptive to open conversations, and if Lucy would like to email me, I'm very available, and with some ideas, input, be happy to look at them. But in terms of policy going forward, when we make policy changes or strategy changes, then we consult with the public, and frequently we don't get a lot of response, and I'm disappointed with that on occasions, but that just seems to be the way of the world.
But that does happen with consultations in general, doesn't it?
It does, and we try our best to engage. We always issue press releases. We make as much as something as we can, but at the end of the day, it's up to the public to interact with us.
It is, or maybe it's a different way of doing it. Although these days, there's quite a different way of communicating with the public.
Well, we've taken to modern social media, and anyone who follows Twitter or Facebook will know that we do that quite frequently. We let people know what's going on, and there is some interaction with that. But at the end of the day, it does rely on someone then going onto the website to have a look at the consultation document.
Right. Now, could I please ask the Minister, how many boats did Barul escort back to the island for illegal catch and fishing in 2017?
I'm not sure of the exact number, but there were several successful prosecutions at high level of fines, and I would say that the figures are in the tens, but not more than that. The Barul is only one part of our enforcement process. A lot of it's actually done sitting in the fisheries office, looking at computer screens and tracking vessels through the VMS, which is not very exciting work.
What do you think your success rate is?
In terms of prosecutions, when we catch up with someone.
Well, catching them, I really meant.
Yes.
The
Well, it's difficult to assess. As we were talked about earlier, there is a conception and a reality that there are problems, and that's why we brought in extra measures. But the extent of the problem is always difficult to gauge, because until you catch someone in the act, or you're able to track through with the intelligence you get, it's difficult to gauge.
Right. Now, our next caller on the line's Ken, another man from Peel. Good afternoon, Ken.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. I, like most people, a lot of people, don't think this biosphere thing's up to much when the Isle of Man got it awarded, when we're still pumping raw sewage into the sea. And my next question is, when is the Peel sewage works going to be up and running? I know it's in Glenfarber. Okay?
Right, well, there we are. Well, you hang on then, because Geoffrey can no doubt deal with that. Well, first of all, what about Peel and raw sewage?
Well, it's not very edifying that we are, in this day and age, discharging raw sewage into the sea off Peel. It's something that needs addressing. In fact, we are addressing it. A site has been identified. Funding has been put in place. And I think by 2020, I hope, there will be a new sewage works in place. So we are moving on in that respect. And the biosphere status that we have at the moment was granted for what we've got. That doesn't mean we sit on our laurels and do nothing, and sewage is one of those issues around the island that's been there for a while. It's not going to go away. It's all about funding and also the planning process to get these things done. But there is a willingness to do this with targets in terms of funding, but Peel will certainly have a sewage works in the not too distant future.
Well, that's good news, but what you said about the biosphere, you haven't convinced me that it's up to much, because how can you get it awarded if you're pumping raw sewage into the sea?
Well, it's not just about sewage, it's about the whole biosphere, the whole environment we live in. And if you look at the island in the whole, we are a very pleasant place to live. We have some problematical issues. Sewage is one of them that need addressing. But if you look at the island as a whole, drive around on a sunny day, the environment is pretty good, and our landscape and everything look to be in fairly good heart.
Right, okay. Well, yes, I thought maybe they should have just awarded it to the bit that's covered by the Irish scheme in sewage and lift, rather than giving it to the status of the whole of the Isle of Man, which, yes, is a country. But it does seem odd, that's all.
Okay, Ken, anything else you'd like to talk about?
Well, could go on about the fisheries and the cock-up that, When, I must say, was this not just the fisheries with Scottish thing? Was it not discussed in the Irish Council when we have these meetings?
The Fisheries Management Agreement is not part of the Irish Council discussions. It's a separate issue altogether. We are, as I said in the earlier programme, responsible for licensing and obviously the science that goes along with sustainability in our own waters. You nearly used the word cock up then with regard to the new measures. I don't see it was that at all. We brought in measures that we thought were appropriate. There was some kickback on that, and we now have new measures in place which I think are far more powerful enforcement tool for the future, and it will mean that those that actually are causing the problems pay the price, and that's what we want.
Is it a 2-year licence you give people?
No, we give them an annual licence,
Right.
but it's based on historic rights to fish here, and if we have miscreant behaviour that results in a prosecution, we can withdraw that historic right, and that's a big deterrent.
So they don't get another one later?
They will not get another licence.
Okay, thanks, Minister.
Okay, Ken, thank you for joining us. Right, that was Ken from Peel. Now, question for the DEFA Minister. How long before Douglas horse tram stables are protected? A unique building in the world and arguably still required for the tram service operation. Building and conservation doesn't appear to figure in your priorities, says Chris.
Well, I've got some good news. In as much that we are looking at registering the building. Obviously, that there's a lot of periphery buildings around that aren't worthy of preservation, but I understand this is probably the last remaining example of its type in the British Isles. I'm not saying that it will be registered, but we're looking at it, and it will probably end up going out to public consultation.
Right, now, telephone lines are clear, 66 13 68. We would like to hear from you, please. You can, of course, continue to text 166177 and email to studio@manxradio.com. Mrs. Hammett has been looking at your Twitter journal, Geoffrey, she says, and she says she notices that the DEFA department actually tweeted a tweet of a jolly that you had attended with Poker Stars at a conference on January the 29th. What are your thoughts on the women being used as eye candy at the recent well-attended ICE seminar this month?
Well, I'm glad that someone reads our tweeting or Twitter, but she has sadly got the wrong end of the stick. I did not attend that conference and was not there, and I know little about what happened there except what I've seen in the press. When it comes to eye candy, grid girls, whatever, I think we live in a free world and it's up to people to make their own decision on that. I don't have any particular view.
Right. Well, it's changing, of course, all over the place, isn't it, at the moment? But let's see now. Isn't it a pity that the big farmers who take their big country care payments are the main exporters of livestock? And most of the time, definitely interested in listening to Farmers Union, driven by the big boys. I'm behind the meat plant and always have been. Good luck to them and good luck to the new team. So there's 2 points there. He's wishing the new luck, but he's saying that, in fact, the people who get the benefit of some of these schemes are people who have been big business anyway.
Well, we have some larger farmers on the island, but compared to the UK, they are fairly small farms. We are currently reviewing ADS. We're working and liaising with the NFU, and we will be looking at that going into the future. Michael Gove has announced various additions and maybe future restrictions in terms of the amount of money that you can claim under an ADS scheme. Well, if we did that on the same premise on the Isle of Man, it would probably affect 4 or 5 people. Our farms are a lot smaller. When it comes to luck with the new meat plant, I'm hoping that the team we're putting in place have the skill to turn it round, and luck will be a secondary product.
Mind you, luck always helps.
It does indeed, Roger.
Would it be possible to put down stabbits? That's the thing that the breakwater here was made of. Put down stabbits to create safe areas for fish to breed. Tom would like to know.
Well, we don't need to do that. We know where particularly scallops spawn, and we have a revolving closed area policy so that we give chance for recovery in various areas, and we are going to designate more marine conservation zones in due course, and that will help preserve fish stocks, not just scallops, but all fish.
Well, Wendy has a good point. She says that A lady recently spoke on Manx Radio's Talking Heads, and she said that she lives in Derby and has heard fishing boats going up and down, obviously fishing during the night, which I believe is illegal. She says she's reported it to the relevant authorities, but it still continues and the boats are gone by the morning. Is anything being done to catch these culprits? What about using drones if you haven't got the manpower to police the seas? I feel you should have stuck to the decision with the Scottish fishermen you originally planned for. It won't be long before our seas are fished out altogether. Well, there's two issues there. Whether you stick to the thing or not, that's one thing. But there is a point here that we talk about all this policing. We talk about what you'll do if you catch somebody. But if they're doing it at night, nobody's going to get caught.
Well, they can't do it at night without being observed. We monitor and record vessel movements during the day and during the night. Sometimes there is a misconstrued idea that a vessel that's making way is fishing. It may just be making way to make it comfortable on the boat rather than bobbing up and down. If we do believe vessels are fishing out of the curfew hours, then we will arrange to intercept them if necessary, or contact them. And in the future, with the stronger measures we have in terms of enforcement, licence suspension, they could see their licence suspended until they come up with a reasonable explanation of what they've been doing.
How fast is the barrule?
I'm not sure, to be honest. You'd have to ask the skipper.
The reason I say that is because I have heard it said that the people doing this fishing that they shouldn't be see it's coming miles away and they've got time to take evasive action.
Well, there is an element of speed, but we do have the rib available on the Barul, which is a fast vessel. And yes, people do know where the Barul is, which doesn't help. But what we tend to do is have some intelligence, either locally gleaned or through the VMS system, and we target boats that we know are likely to be doing the wrong thing.
OK, now we have on the line John. Good afternoon, John.
Good afternoon, Good afternoon, Minister. Very interesting listening to the programme today, and also it's very heartening to hear that the island has now got international recognition for the very clean environment it is. I mean, I'm someone who, for many, many years, have been working on all sorts of fronts in terms of sustainability, particularly in relation to the island. I mean, one thing is the problem of the disposal of cheeseway from the creamery, and I mean, in relation to that, I talked to Edinburgh Napier University, who are currently completing a project to convert the waste products from the whisky industry into biobutanol, which is a perfect replacement for petrol. Now, cheeseway potentially has the same. It has the same potential to be converted into biobutanol. I've talked to the creamery. I've talked to Edinburgh Napier. They're very interested. But the problem is, where do we go in government to get someone to say, well, let's look into this? Because, on the numerous occasions that I've tried to talk to different people in government about various things that I'm doing, it's like you hit a brick wall. And much of it, I feel, is because, well, we're doing it this way, we've always done it this way, why should we change? And yet there's so many initiatives out there that would have great value in the Isle of Man alongside what I'm doing with my company. Many of the initiatives I'm involved in, effectively, they are of no financial benefit to our company. It's just that they are there, we identify them, we try to move the ideas on, but they just seem to die.
Well, so the point then is you've got products that you can't get through to the various government departments. Is that what you're saying?
Well, it can get
who do you
through
talk to?
But the point is, there doesn't seem to be any point that someone with a good idea or something that's a potentially good idea for government as a whole can go to and say, look, you need to look at this. Here are the contacts. Here's the thing. This is not of any benefit to us, but it's potentially a great benefit to you.
Okay.
Right. Well,
Right. Okay. So where does he go, Geoffrey?
Well, first of all, we've had the big Save campaign initiative over the last year, and we got a lot of input from the public, a lot of ideas, which we're sifting through, and some will inevitably end up being used. But when we come to something like the creamery and the whey disposal, I can tell you that in the last year, I think I've had 3 or 4 fairly intense meetings in connection with that, and we would like to see that used as a food stock or for some other purpose, and there are people looking at that. So there are ideas that we're acting on. We're not just sitting there letting it bubble up and forgetting all about it. We are
What happens to it at the present then?
It's discharged into Douglas Bay, which is a waste of a food product. It could be used for animal feed, it could be dried, all sorts of things can happen to it, but we have the same problem with a lot of things on the Isle of Man. It's a matter of scale. So we've got to find someone that could scale down the use of the product. In the UK, it's used as a feedstock, pigs particularly, I understand.
So let's just go back to John for a minute then. John, are you saying this is something you could do?
Well, this is something. I mean, I've talked to the team that is actually running the biobutanol project at Edinburgh Napier University. They are very interested in looking at other feedstocks into the concept, and yet, you know, I mean, I've made various people within government, within the creamery, aware of this, and yet, as far as you know, it's all very well saying yes, fine. There's stuff going on behind the scenes. But, you know, we have an enormous amount of expertise in the Isle of Man, and it's very important. I think it's important that there is a point that we say, right, if you've got an idea in relation to something like this, then this is these are the individuals or the group that you need to contact. Is this the Department of Enterprise?
Well, if John has an idea that he believes that it would practically use the whey, then I suggest he emails it to me, and I'll certainly point it in the right direction for him.
Well, anyway, John, thank you for joining us. And interesting point. You've heard that. Maybe you should email then Geoffrey at the Department of Environment in St John's. Okay.
Hopefully
thank you.
I
Cheers.
can then talk to him about all the ideas we've got. Okay. Take care.
Okay. Well, thank you for calling. Bye bye. It's time now for a break. Welcome back to the Mannin Line. Our studio guest is the Minister for the Environment, Food and Agriculture, Geoffrey Boot. He's the MHK for Glen Faber and Peel. Now, with the push via food festivals and farmers' markets, how many of the pop-up stalls claiming to sell Manx meat are farm assured and have full traceability, says Greg?
Well, a lot of them. In fact, most of them, I would hope. And with the new Butcher's Provenance label, that will be more effectively policed as well.
Right, how does Mr Boot feel about voting against the 20 Manx politicians and losing the battle to completely and democratically elect the next Chief Minister of our island?
Yes, it was a view that I took, indeed the view that the Chief Minister took, that the Chief Minister is the Chief Minister of the Parliament of the Isle of Man, and that includes the Legislative Council.
By the way, if anybody wonders why I'm batting along at a great speed, I'm delighted to say we have a lot of texts and emails in, and I'm going to try and cover most of them before we go to the news at 2 o'clock. I was at a Peel seminar recently and heard Geoffrey's wife say that cameras should never be used in question time. Why does Geoffrey not go with a convention about YouTube cameras in Tynwald in the information age and the modern world?
I've already accepted that. One of the big problems with the cameras per se is that people have a tendency to grandstand, and at the end of the day we're there to do the business of Tynwald or the Keys, not grandstand to the public.
How can we compete in any market when the Chief Minister rolls over after a call from Nicola Sturgeon in the scallop wars, says Bill? I think we've covered that.
We have indeed, and to a deep degree.
Now, we've had the one about planning permission, another one, planning permission of the Imperial Hotel. We've done that. And we've asked about the countryside scare schemes, and we've got another one come in, says you're doing a sterling job. Could I ask Mr Boot, how on earth is the fishery protection vessel expected to inspect all non-Manx ship trawling for Manx scallops? His first proposal was the correct one, but now it's a bit of a joke.
Well, no, it's not, and we covered that earlier. The Barul has a role to play, but with the vessel monitoring system and other intelligence, declarations of landing, etc., we can do a good job. And the new enforcement measures, I'm sure, will prove very effective in the future and better than getting every vessel with the resource that uses up to call it a Manx port.
Sorry, I'm not buying it. Planning is in a mess. If the economic development strategy involves letting offices be built without enough room for the staff up at the Cool, where there isn't enough parking, while Douglas offices lie empty with yet more waiting to be built in Lord Street, it's all idiotic.
Well, that's partially the role of the planning review that we're conducting at the moment. And of course, there's an Eastern Area Plan which covers Douglas, and we're looking at those issues. So it's in process.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, there's a whole series of things about, after all, you've got a building out at St John's. How do you find that as far as the staff is concerned?
Well, I think
does it work out there?
St John's is a very good example of what and how things can be done, but it's out of town is controversial, but at the same time, companies want new headquarter blocks. Do we impede them and put them off coming to the island so that they go to Jersey or Guernsey or somewhere else? No, we want them on island. So sometimes you have to facilitate these things.
It's always a campaign to have more in Ramsey, isn't it?
It would be nice, and one of my ideas is that we have an all-island plan rather than east and west and south and north plan. They tend to go out of date as they're renewed in term. We're fairly small.
They tend to go out of date before they're even implemented.
Oh, I'm very much aware of that, and I think my idea would be to be less prescriptive and be more island-wide in ambition for housing, industrial or commercial development.
Now, I think this is a little unfair. Why does the Minister put the convenience of the waiting time of vehicles on Manx roads before the safety of the resident pedestrians, which I don't think is quite what you said.
I didn't say that, but no. Anyway, no, we move on from that one.
Good afternoon, Mr. Boot. You've just said that you look at planning after an independent inspector has made his decision, and then you decide whether to override it or not. What qualification do you hold to make this decision apart from just being in charge at the time? After all, he might be moved on within 6 months to health or schools. What's the point of the government paying the expert if he can just override this expert's opinion? Although we see the Isle of Man is short of cash, says Julie.
Well, the expert opinion is just that, one person's opinion, and that person comes over from the UK and they use their planning experience. Personally, I have a surveying qualification, but that doesn't mean every minister will have that, and I have been involved in development. But taking that a little bit further, it's not it's not a simple matter of me going, oh yes, I'm overturning that decision. We look at the policy, the strategies behind it. It's peer reviewed with my chief executive officer and another planning officer, and on occasions we also take advice from the AG's office on the legality within the planning policy guidelines. So sometimes there's a Manx solution that an inspector in the UK doesn't see.
Right. Okay, what about the very poor state of our public footpaths and glens? I appreciate that some volunteer help is needed, but why are there so few staff on the ground as opposed to numbers behind the desks, especially with big plans for Walking Festival this year, says Claire?
Well, there are resource implications. We are tasked throughout government to save money. I would like to see more done on our public footpaths. DOI are ultimately responsible for that, but we do work across departments. We are working on a voluntary scheme in a similar way to Beach Buddies, and hopefully that will come to fruition and help the situation.
Doesn't answer the question of why have you got so many desk jockeys, though, and not out doing it.
I may sound as if I'm a poacher come gamekeeper, but the reality is we need people behind desks as well as on the ground, and there's a lot goes on that people don't understand, and we are short of people, to be fair, in many of the roles, planning, enforcement.
What happened to all the election promises for so many of the members to cut bureaucracy?
Well, I am endeavouring to do that within the department, but when I find that I have no enforcement officer, we do now, and we have no registrations officer or half a post, and people are putting pressure on me to register buildings, carry out enforcement work, I begin to understand the lack of resource that we have.
Now, government bent over backwards to Scottish pressure over fishing, and any ideas regarding checks that will actually work are simply wrong, because similar schemes failed in Iceland and Canada.
Well, I think that's a wrong interpretation of the situation. The Scottish may have slanted it that we backed off. Yes, we did come back from the original scheme, but that was going to be very resource hungry from our perspective we were going to have to be manning or available at different ports. This new scheme, I'm sure, is a win-win situation for the Isle of Man. It'll use less resource, and the measures and enforcement terms are likely to be more effective and draconian.
Why are Mr. Boots' views on ShopRite proudly... What are Mr. Boots' views on ShopRite proudly boasting about selling Manx products, and yet they have a pseudo-meat product at a greatly reduced price alongside our own range of meats? Also, how about getting a herring industry back in our waters?
Well, two things there with regard to ShopRite. ShopRite are a local supermarket chain, and the profit that they make does stay on Ireland. Their commercial policy with regard to meat procurement is down to them. We try and influence, and I'm sure that the new meat plant operators will assist in providing meat of the right quality and right price.
Got to make sure the labelling, of course. I went into a Watterson supermarket in Bury in Manchester to discover on the fish counter, caught my eye, was kippers. And when I read the sign, it didn't say Manx kippers, it said Manx style kippers.
Yeah, well, people are entitled to market on that basis. Yes, it would be lovely to have some locally caught herring processed through to Manx kippers, but at the moment that relies on quota allocation, our fisheries management agreement. It's not as simple as it seems, and we need to have fishermen that are willing to catch and land herring here.
Now, this is probably the last caller of the day, and we'll come right back to where we came in. So we've got about a minute to do this, if that, Geoffrey. Could the Minister expand on the plans for the meat plant? We keep hearing that something's happening, but we never actually hear what.
Well, I think it's been made fairly public what's happening. We've had 2 meetings with industry, and that's the farming industry and producers. We've also had a procurement meeting. I think it's out there. In basic terms, we have formed a new company, which will be have a new board. It will sit above the FMA at the moment, the Fat Stock Marketing Association, and we'll have control of the meat plant. It's not a government-owned company. We have a golden share.
Right, now, we've got literally 14 seconds, so Geoffrey, thank you for joining us on both the Sunday Opinion and today's Mannin Line.
My pleasure, Roger.
So our guest was the Minister for the Environment, Food and Agriculture, Geoffrey Boot. He's the MHK for Glen, Faber and Peel. Catherine Nicholl was on the switch, and I'm Roger Watterson. Until next week, goodbye.